Hello, U.S. History, period 2, 4, and 6. I'm making this recording because there's a really good chance I'm not going to be available during at least two of the class periods today. Today is Friday, February 26th. I am at school, I'm in my classroom, but I may not be available. So I'm making this recording to just make sure that you get through today's activity. There's not too much to do, but we're finishing the topic of the Depression and New Deal today. So you're going to need your causes of the Great Depression notes. Remember that this is a recording, so you can always pause and go back and repeat as necessary all of the information that you need. I'm going to start at FDR and the New Deal. That's where we left off. Remember that Herbert Hoover was very unpopular because people believed he wasn't doing enough about the Great Depression. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt is able to win very easily. He had been campaigning on a New Deal for the American people. And our job today is going to be to analyze some of those New Deal programs, and eventually you're going to be memorizing about 8 of them. Okay, we're going to start. Alrighty. Roosevelt is elected, takes office in 1933. And when presidents are elected, they generally tend to judge their first 100 days to see their progress. What Roosevelt has to do is there's a lot of emergency help that needs to go out. A lot of people are suffering the effects of the Depression. The unemployment rate reaches up to 35%, as I mentioned before. And so during his first 100 days, his first priority is something called the bank holiday. Remember that banks had been failing. People had lost their confidence in putting their money in the bank. So he orders them to close for 5 days for restructuring, to get some stimulus money from the government, and also to institute some legislation like protection for bank deposits. So Roosevelt realizes if banks aren't operating, the economy cannot recover. So that's his very, very first priority. He's going to encourage Congress to pass 15 bills in his first 100 days. And overall, he is instrumental in restoring the nation's confidence in government, and he really gives people hope that the Depression can be alleviated, can be solved. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide. Remember, you can always slow this down. Underneath what you just wrote, I want you to draw a line, and then underneath that line, you are going to write the New Deal. It's not an entirely separate set of notes, it's just a transition of topics, so you can put it on the same paper. When Roosevelt takes office in 1933, he immediately moves to what he calls the 3 R's. And he's literally going to try to pass about hundreds of programs, and they fall into generally 3 categories. He calls it relief, recovery, and reform. Immediate relief, like food, shelter, medicine for people. Recovery, things like making sure the banks can work, things like making sure the stock market can start operating again. And then long-term reform. If you don't change the structure of the banks or the structure of the stock market, and you don't reform them for the long term, you're just going to keep having the same problems over and over. So he is very successful in getting these programs passed. Sometimes he does things that aren't entirely kosher. For example, there's threats by the Supreme Court that some of his programs are unconstitutional. So in order to make sure that his stuff gets voted through, he actually adds justices to the Supreme Court. He takes the number from 9 to 12 so he can win some votes. Not entirely great for a president to do, not unconstitutional. So because of stuff like that, he's really expanding the power of the presidency. He becomes our first, what they call, imperial president. Like he's got a lot of power. Okay. Now I want you to get an entirely separate piece of paper. You can pause this while you find one. And on that entirely separate piece of paper, I want you to label it New Deal Program Chart at the top. You're going to be making a reference chart for yourself because obviously I had mentioned you're going to learn some of these New Deal programs. We got to kind of break them down and figure out how to memorize them. And out of the hundreds that existed, you're learning about 8. So don't worry too much. Once you have labeled your separate piece of paper New Deal program chart, you are going to copy down the programs on the next slide on that chart to use as reference for yourself. Okay, I'm going to switch this. So the New Deal programs you're going to be responsible for learning are right here. When you have a quiz on this next week, what I'm going to show you is the initials, like FDIC. What you're going to have to do is identify the program by the name and then tell me the purpose. So what we're doing right now is just identifying the programs. First one is FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The purpose of that one is going to be to insure bank deposits. The SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. That agency regulated the stock market so that there wouldn't be insider trading and there'd be rules, etc. The CCC is Civilian Conservation Corps. They employed young people to do public works projects. Like you can see on the right there, there's some young men building a road. The FERA, Federal Emergency Relief Administration. That agency was delivering emergency relief, food, medicine, housing to people that needed it. So that was the relief part. The AAA is not the Auto Club, it is the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. That agency gave low-interest loans to farmers, helped farms get out of trouble, and made sure that enough of the right food was produced that the country needed. The Tennessee Valley Authority was creating hydroelectricity projects in the Tennessee Valley. So they would dam up the rivers. They would obviously build power generation plants with turbines that were turned by water, and that's what created the electricity there. The SSA, Social Security Administration, I'm actually going to talk about that one last on the next slide. The C/PWA, I'm going to refer to this one as the PWA, Public Works Administration. And that agency put unemployed men to work on big public projects like the Golden Gate Bridge, for example, was one that they built during the Great Depression. The NEA, National Endowment for the Arts, employed artists, actors, writers, doing all kinds of projects for the government, a lot of history projects for that. Remember, you can pause this for as long as you need it, but once you have this chart made, underneath where you wrote National Endowment for the Arts, you're going to add just one program description. And it's probably the most important one, so I want to make sure we focus on the Social Security Act. Social Security Act was passed in 1935, and the original purpose was it created a pension that would be given to the elderly when they retired, and they would get like a monthly check. And this was necessary because older people had a high rate of poverty that got, of course, really bad during the Great Depression. So this created a safety net so they could have a minimum income. No one is getting rich off their Social Security check, but they are surviving. And at this point, at least during the Great Depression, that was really important. Later, this program will be expanded to include like minors that lost parents before they were 18, or people with disabilities. So later, this Social Security is going to be expanded. Okay, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to switch you back into Google Classroom. Go back into your class Google Classroom, and underneath where the recording was today, I want you to scroll down and find the 2 New Deal program grids that are there. Your job by the end of class today is going to be to do the first column only. This is not going to be turned in today. The only thing I'll be checking for today is this first column. So I've identified here the programs that I'm pretty much going to quiz you on. They're identified in the first column by their initial and their title. And your job today is the second column. You want to tell me the purpose. What was that program supposed to do? And then we'll worry about this column later, and we'll do it in class together next week. So the programs you're looking for are CCC, TVA, FDIC, and WPA on this sheet. I couldn't fit both on one document, so I have two. But the place you find this information is mostly on your Quizlet. When you open your flashcards that you mostly just completed, many of them are these programs. So there's SEC right there, and there's your answer right there. Regulates the stock market is the purpose. So once I have filled out that first column, if I can't find any of these on my Quizlet, you can look in the glossary of your book or just look it up online. Either way is fine. There are two of these. So the second sheet, the programs you're covering are PWA, SSA, NYA, and SEC. Okay, so that you should be able to finish at least that purpose of the program before class is over. On each one of these sheets, it says historian up here. This is something I do in class with stations, so that's why I have that. That's your name goes there. All right, so your job is to use that New Deal program chart, use the Quizlet flashcards, and or the glossary of the book to complete those New Deal program handouts, just the first column. Do not turn them in yet. Do not submit them. Do not turn them in yet. Okay, you guys are excused now to go in. Make sure you mark your attendance and make sure you complete that first column. I will see you Monday.